What's this? Who was interned?
Japanese.
What was the reason? What was the narrative about the Japanese? Say what? They might be spies.
We were told that we were protecting them.
Oh, come on now. That's exactly it. We're going to protect them for their own good by taking their businesses and their homes and putting them in camps. And then once we do that, we won't tell the whole story. That these camps were surrounded by barbed wire. You could not leave freely. They didn't have the best medical care, and kids went uneducated.
Most of us did not learn that in school.
And most of us did not learn it in school, absolutely. And you know what, truthfully, to our credit, when most Americans really heard about this, they were outraged. Outraged, universally outraged. How did the system pull this on us? It was through these narratives that we bought into. Well, they might be. It would make sense. They're from Japan. They still speak Japanese.
Today it's Mexico.
I'm sorry?
Today it's Mexico.
Today it's Mexico. We got a slap for that. Someone, question or hand down.
I was just going to say,
Yes.
this is a nice version of an internment camp, because in
Absolutely.
Southern California, they were horse stables.
Yes. This is probably Arkansas, Oklahoma. This is probably a horse, not a facility not made for human beings. Absolutely.
Right, right. Huh.
What's the narrative? What's
You remember it.
but give me the narrative. What's the narrative?
Illegals.
Give me the narrative. Give me they're coming over the border in droves.
Yes.
Getting here and having anchor babies.
Yes, take your jobs.
Taking jobs and criminals. Consuming health care, taking advantage of education. I mean, all of that. Okay, now in there, are there some parts of that that may have some basis in truth? In the sense of, okay, economically, do immigrants often occupy low-wage jobs?
That we don't want.
And exactly. Almost every group, white and people of color, have been through this mill, right? But so who can tell me about the American detention system, the detention of undesired immigrants? What can you tell me about it?
Once you're caught, if you have no paperwork, you're sent to a federal prison for 90 days. Then you're sent before a judge. During those 90 days, you're in a federal penitentiary. You lose all civil rights. You're fed 3 squares, and then you're sent back with a $10 bill saying, have fun.
And are these men?
Mostly men, but also women and children.
Hold on.
Well, children.
No.
Yeah.
I heard someone say children. Women and children. Families. Seniors. Young people. Babies. It's mandated that we must have a daily census of over 33,000 in detention. Now, should we have a right to exclude persons who are dangerous, who are criminals? As a sovereign country, you should have that right, right? Should you have a right to determine, how you will use your public monies and what you'll use them for? Absolutely. But there's a whole virulent narrative that complicates the conversation. Because when you ask most Americans, do we believe in fairness and equality? Most Americans will say yes, and that's not jive. Most Americans believe that's who we are. When you ask most Americans, do you want people to see America as a destination where people can live with freedom and opportunity? Most of us will say yes, that's who we are. But then there are these other narratives that really make it hard for us to make our yes a yes. Brother, yes?
Well, it strikes me that there's always the other, and this is before it was immigration justice,
Yeah.
where it was Arab Americans.
Absolutely.
And the lies, somebody, the system is telling the lies, because the truth, when people hear the truth, my daughter-in-law sat down with Congressman Ehlers when he was still in office and had him meet with, a Christian undocumented family,
Yes.
and have a conversation
Yes.
with them. And even he didn't realize, I shouldn't say even he, he believed the lies that were being told. And that's when he began to change. His, the narrative became different for him. And
Absolutely.
but the system continues to tell the lies about the other. And when people find out the truth, whether it's in internment camps or undocumented immigrants, you know, then especially people of faith, and when they realize these are other systems, by and large.
When you challenge the narrative, you said it so beautifully. When his narrative was challenged, and there was a more powerful narrative created through our faith values, there's the opportunity for change. Yes, brother, what were you going to say?
Another part of the reality is that the detention centers are owned by the Corrections Corporation
Oh,
of
my.
America.
Oh,
And
come on, this is it.
Public funds are going to
This is it.
tremendously lucrative.
See, this is it. This is it. All right, I'm going to make you take my jacket off. I'm telling you. This is what I believe. Here's what I believe. I believe when decent, ordinary people like you and I get together in a room like this, God is with us, compelling us to tell the truth to one another, begging us to live into our values, what we were taught. What we were taught. My whole life was shaped by a Christ who showed me to live. Not only that I should love everyone, but it would be transformative if I did. For me, for them, and for us. I have had this conversation in rooms full of very conservative, politically very conservative people, and it's the same conversation. People know. There are driving narratives that are driving us apart. This whole thing about, liberal and conservative, it's just a bunch of crap. Some of us who are liberal and progressive are sometimes conservative, and some of you all who are conservative are sometimes liberal and progressive. It's a bunch of crap. But it's the driving narrative, driving. And thank you for exposing how that narrative operates. Because the same folk who own these private detention centers own the private prisons. In my state, the state of Louisiana, where I was for 2 years, the state of Louisiana signed an agreement with Corrections Corporation of America, giving them, or selling them, or leasing them a Louisiana prison, and giving them a monopoly over the manufacture of state-worn garments. If you were a police officer, some other public servant, and you had a garment, it was sewn in that prison. So what did that do? It destroyed the free enterprise. Some of my free enterprise brothers and sisters, y'all should be upset about this. It destroyed the free enterprise. There were businesses outside of prison walls that were doing this work. Those people are out of work. And you can pay a prisoner pennies. Those of us who like to eat healthy, we go to Whole Foods and we buy our organic farm-raised salmon. It's very likely that organic farm-raised salmon was grown on a prison farm in Colorado. If it's sold outside of Colorado, they have to pay the prisoners a minimum wage, for which they come and grab it back because they then make the prisoners pay for their incarceration.
Right.
If it is sold within the state of Colorado, they don't have to pay them a minimum wage. They pay them pennies. It's slavery by another name. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
So thank you for pointing that out. And this just blows my mind how much we all know this. But the system depends on us not having rooms like this. I'm going to keep going with this. Just look at this one. It's really powerful. I'm trying to wonder why. Please permit me a moment to try to I'm trying to figure out why this particular picture gets me. And I think it's because of really two people who really operate as scapegoats, being caught up in this narrative that is such a powerfully damning narrative. It's very likely, it's not, I don't know this for a fact, but it's very likely this is for having a pocket full of marijuana. Or more and more, I don't know if you all understand what's going on around debt, but more and more debt is being criminalized. I remember my mother talking about debtors' prisons when I was, she grew up in the Great Depression. But there's this woman, right? I don't know. There's a narrative here, though. What's the narrative? The master narrative is animating this slide.
Not criminal.
Black men are dangerous. They're criminals. Dangerous and criminals. You should watch out for them. Let me tell you that when I was driving back from Dallas to to Baton Rouge, and I was stopped twice by the Texas Highway Patrol. I wasn't doing nothing, but I fit the profile. I got my collar on, and I got my Bible in the front seat because I know I'm in Texas. That's my narrative.
Driving while black.
I'm driving while black. I got stopped. So, police officer, he stopped someone. The guy over here is on my door. I slow down so I can get over behind him. So because you have to get over. As soon as I pass him, he lights me up. Says, "You were tailgating that truck." I said, "Officer, I got over behind that truck because I don't want to give you space to do your job." So he only gave me a warning. 25 minutes later, he pulled me over again. I pulled you over because I think you were weaving. That's the narrative. What's the narrative here?
She'll probably burn that flag.
I think it depends on your perspective.
Well, give me something from your, give me something.
Here's a woman who's loyal to the United States.
What kind of woman? Probably.
Could be Muslim, could be another faith who's covered. It doesn't mean she's a Muslim.
Doesn't mean she's a Muslim,
No.
but there's a narrative about that, isn't there?
It depends on your perception. We all have our own bias.
Absolutely. So if you look at that, would you think most Americans are going to make an assumption about that?
Depends on who you are.
So I got a lawyer. I'm a good lawyer too. You're right. It does depend on who you are. But is there a narrative about women that wear a veil?
I personally think that she is modest, but that's because I have friends who are covered up.
Absolutely.
It's my interactions with people who have shown me that she's just like me.
Okay. Your interactions have shown you that she's just like you, so there must be a narrative that says something different. I'm just trying to get at the narrative. I get you're a together sister. You look like a together sister. Kind-hearted and love everyone, and that's cool. And you have a good sense of how the world operates. I get where you're coming from. I'm just trying to get to the narrative, right? I'm the garbage man in this case. I just want to get to the garbage. There's a narrative here. Whether we know it or not, my sister's right. Whether we know it or not, she represents what?
9/11. 9/11.
Wow.
Yep.
9/11. I've heard people say, how dare she hold that flag? 9/11. And it gets reinforced by this lame thing about this mosque that was going to be built near 9/11. We consumed all that for weeks, didn't we? Which was never built.
Now they're selling tickets.
To the 9/11. Just so wrong. What's this narrative?
She should just go to work.
She's using her kids to manipulate people to get more money.
Using her kids to manipulate people. Because why would she do that?
Because we'll feel sorry for the kids and we'll give money. And then if it's just a single woman, then we won't. Well, we still might, but.
When I show what?
Because she can make more money this way than working at Walmart.
See, when I show this slide, it's almost all white people who talk when I show this slide. Y'all know this narrative, right? No good, you're pulling us down, you won't want to go to work, you know? Immoral. Ooh, wow. Absolutely immoral. Right?
No dad.
No dad? You're looking for her hand to see if there's a ring on it, right? No dad?
Well, you're from Kentucky or Tennessee.
Oh, Lord. I'm from Kentucky. I resemble that remark. Powerful narratives that operate. Now, let's isolate this for a second. She obviously is struggling economically, right? She's poor. Is this the face of poverty in America?
No.
What's the narrative around poverty? Who's poor? Black and Hispanics are poor, right? That's the narrative. What's she doing showing up in this picture then? And you know what happens? She engenders a lot of animus and dislike and disregard from whites.
Yeah, she doesn't even deserve to be poor.
She doesn't even deserve to be poor. Yes.
Because when I look at it, the narrative that I have is, so what happened? Did her husband leave? Did she drop from some socioeconomic place to be there? That's what I see.
These two children represent the poorest Americans. Poor white children are the poorest Americans. which is against the narrative, absolutely. Go back and look up the numbers. They're the poorest Americans, but they're not the face of poverty.
That's right.
Only ones. Here's, research shows that if you're a homeless shelter or you're trying to help the poor, you're more likely to get donations if you show this picture. Yes. Because she's deserving. She's like us. She's in our group. Just go, next time you see the display of the homeless or an organization sends you something in the mail, just look and see who's on the cover of it. Because they're not stupid. Although these two children are in fact the poorest Americans, and we have a great deal of revulsion by her, we're still more likely to give money on behalf. Crazy, isn't it? And this picture. What's this about? What's the narrative there?
Hopeless. Grieving.
Scared.
Previous slide is of a woman who was in deep distress over losing all that she owned in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. What were the powerful narratives about race that left her and so many others vulnerable, abandoned, and alone?
They were initially called refugees in their own country.
Say what?
They were initially called refugees in their own country.
In their own country. We actually used the term about a fellow American. They're refugees from Katrina.
But it was because of homosexuality.
It was because of homosexuality and God condemned New Orleans.
Yeah.
I heard that story too. God was getting even for New Orleans because of rampant homosexuality in this country and all that kind of craziness. What was the narrative that left her so abandoned in that superdose? She was dangerous and we don't want her in our community? This is going to blow your mind. But the area that was hardest hit in New Orleans was the areas of some of the highest home ownership by African Americans in the country. These were poor folks, but they owned their homes. Imagine if you as a homeowner had been treated similarly. They didn't do all that they could to. I mean, this is how powerful these narratives are. The stories that get told. Well, let me race to the conclusion here. Again, they're universal, held and believed by many. They're normative. They dictate the common reality. They're performative. They're acted out in interpersonal, intrapersonal, institutional, and systemic ways. And if Jesus said this, you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. So, in the time left, how do we know the truth? The truth, I think, is caught up in the narrative of our faith. I'm driven by a lot of the stories of the gospel. But there are a few stories in particular that really, really speak to me about a counter-narrative. I would love for you to remember that term. A counter or prophetic narrative. I'd love to share one of those stories with you. So, Jesus was walking and teaching. And he came upon a really ugly but not unfamiliar scene where there were prominent men in the community who had surrounded this woman, a woman who was asked to, in that moment, carry a tremendous amount of shame. And they had stones. And Jesus quickly deduced that this scene was about a stoning that was about to happen. The accusation was that the woman was immoral, and that because of her immoral behavior, the punishment befitting that was stoning, was death. And he came upon this scene and he quickly understood what was going on. He understood the dominant narrative. She's a bad, loose woman. Bad, loose women, and among us good men and women, is dangerous. So they're dangerous, so we should give it. And upon, seeing the scene and understanding the dominant narrative, Jesus laid down a powerful counter narrative. What if, in fact, this woman is of great benefit to us all? What if, in fact, she's an instrument of faith? That she's God's tool in this instance, challenging us around her, challenging us to tell ourselves and one another the truth. That's the counter narrative he was positioning. And he essentially said, let those without sin cast the first stone. Stood in the middle of a space with her. And it says at that moment Jesus got down and was kind of drawing in the sand. We don't know what he was drawing, right? But it's essentially giving people a moment to challenge the dominant narrative that was alive in them, and a moment to consider his counter narrative. Well, you know how the rest of the scene goes, right? This woman doesn't get stoned. And then he turns to her and he relieves her of the scapegoat status, saying, okay, so we won't be doing this anymore, right, sis? Go and sin no more. The powerful narrative is he doesn't shame her, he dignifies her. Brings us all to regard her much differently than the narrative has regarded this woman. Of all the people in the scene, she is probably walking in the greatest amount of God's grace. Totally flip the script, as the young people say, and turn that narrative on its head. When you have a white man in Holland, Michigan, say that the detention of immigrants is mechanized by a system of profit that is the same system that detains black and brown men and women on a daily basis for profit, that's a powerful counter-narrative. And I guarantee you, if there were 100 calls in every community challenging narratives like that, we would begin to see some shift. I guarantee you, if you became a person who just operated out of your faith values, interpret the world through that instrument that God has given you, and see things for the way they really are, you might become this powerful generator of new counter-prophetic narratives. My mama used to say, the one in power gets to tell the story. Right? The one in power gets to tell the story. But she also would say, if you show up looking like hope, people will just give you their hopelessness. If you show up looking like hope, people will give you their hopelessness. If you show up with a counter-narrative, a new narrative, a powerful, God-driven narrative, people will give you, they want to give you that mess that they've been in. Does that make sense? So I'm going to take it a step further, and I'm going to put you on the spot. I believe that you, in fact, you're the counter-narrative. You're the counter-narrative. When you tell your story, it changes everything. So would you be game for the few minutes we have left to be the counter-narrative for a moment? We're gonna break some narrative authority and create some new narrative. This will require some truth telling. So what I want you to do real quick is just grab your neighbor's hand. Now just grab the hand and just turn and say, neighbor. Oh, neighbor. Oh, you tell the truth in my presence. All right. So the rest is up to you. I gave you a hug. The narrative is that whites have it easy. The white privilege dominates everything and creates an easy ride. I just want to see a show of hands of any white persons who lost their parents when they were a child. Anyone in this room?
No, you don't.
How about any white person in this room who was raised poor and really struggled financially as a child? Just raise your hand. Any white person who's ever had anyone in their family struggle with alcoholism or some other form of drug addiction, just raise your hand. I want to have any male, raise your hand if you've ever been bullied. Any guy who's ever been bullied, ever been made to feel ashamed and not strong enough. Just a show of hands of any guy who hasn't always known what to do.
I wasn't sure whether to raise my hand.
Is that the right answer to that one?
Yes, raise your hand, that's the right answer.
Is that okay?
Raise your hand if you are a black person, but you were raised in a family that had money, or that was middle class. Raise your hand nice and high. Y'all bringing some narratives in. We had some money. I know you was poor, Al, but we weren't poor. I used to say, we were so poor, we didn't have the OR, we were just poor. And by vow. Raise your hand if you've ever genuinely wanted to be in a relationship with an immigrant. You ever wanted to be in a relationship with an immigrant? Raise your hand if you've ever wanted to invite an immigrant home with you. Raise your hand if you've ever been on the street with a homeless person and really wanted to say, can you come home for dinner with me? Come on, y'all. We are the counter-narrative. We start telling those stories to one another. You know how many times we tell a story, we say, well, okay, I saw a homeless person, I didn't know if I should give him any money or not, right? So I gave him something, then I felt bad, they might go get something to drink. That's a narrative. What if we told another narrative, you know? Last time for the homeless person, I actually said, come home to dinner. And I brought him home to dinner. So I did this one night. It was cold, it was snowy, it was in Silver Spring. And I know my wife's gonna be mad. I said, you know, it's way too cold. He said, I'm hungry. I said, I'll buy you something to eat. He said, I would really like a home cooked meal. I said, well, come home with me. He said, well, I'm ashamed of the way I look. I said, but don't worry about it. It's okay. No, I'm really ashamed. Would you go and bring me a meal? So my wife was a really good cook. Cooked up her dinner, packed up her meal. And I said, baby, he only got 2 hands. You got a big soup, you know. Brought it down to the brother, and what he asked me next blew my mind. Would you sit here and eat with me? Now I got things to do. I'm running like you all are. But it challenged me. It changed, it pushed the narrative. It made me live into my values. I sat and broke bread with that brother. This is not about me. It's about him challenging the narratives that I operate with. So what I'm saying to you, because I know we're pretty much at the end of our time, aren't we? So let me